Born a princess but treated like a prize, Alessia was handed into a contract marriage, a spoil of war, isolated and used. Her husband Eric was all duty and distance until one night. A mysterious aphrodisiac led to a desperate embrace, and Dawn couldn't make it a mistake. Eric came back changed, tender, possessive, and relentless. He wants her at every spare moment. Was it love, revenge, or something darker unleashed? Watch till the end to discover the truth. The air in the chamber crackled with an unspoken intensity as Princess Alessia struggled against an overwhelming sensation. A series of faint gasps escaped her lips, each breath catching in her throat. Her mind screamed in protest. She couldn't allow this, not any more than this. Her fingers curled, a desperate attempt to resist the potent tide that threatened to consume her. Lord Eric's closeness was a feverish dream, his dark hair brushing her skin as he leaned into her, his own breath ragged. She felt a shiver, a strange mix of fear and an undeniable tremor that whispered his name in her mind, adorning it with unexpected hearts. Their bodies pressed together, her nightgown disheveled as his hand found its way to her thigh, a bold caress that stole her breath. A sharp gasp tore from her, a desperate plea forming on her lips for him to stop. Then, with a sudden surge of panicked energy, Alessia scrambled from the bed, her delicate features contorted with shock and disbelief, seeking escape from the intoxicating embrace and the chaotic rush of her own traitorous emotions. The grand doors of the chamber beckoned, a silent promise of release from the overwhelming closeness. Alessia's hand had hovered, then faltered, against the cold wood of the chamber door, the last vestiges of resistance draining from her. A soft, breathless sound escaped her lips as Eric, ever close, deepened their embrace. He murmured that it was indecent for her to leave dressed as she was, his voice a warm hum against her ear. Turning her head, a flush painting her delicate features, Alessia retorted sharply that this was entirely his fault. Her eyes, heavy-lidded and brimming with exhaustion, noted that morning was about to break. Unfazed, Eric leaned in, his gaze intense. He pleaded, promising that this would be the last time, just one more. Alessia's mind screamed, liar, internally, a silent accusation. He'd uttered those exact words before, and the time before that, and the time before that. She no longer believed him, her spirit worn thin by his relentless devotion, her own traitorous fallen form still humming from their shared night. His lips brushed against her skin, a searing touch that left Alessia breathless, her hands pushing weakly against his chest even as her fallen form betrayed her with an unwelcome shiver. His unwavering intensity felt like a lie, a beautiful deception she couldn't quite accept. She knew it, though, deep down, that the words he whispered and the intensity he showed were real to him now. Eric Lanthimos, the distant hero who was once a stranger, now looked at her with an unfamiliar, profound devotion. He knelt, sharing affection her hand with a tenderness that contradicted every memory she held of their forced union. This man, who desired her without end, was her husband. Yet, until just 3 months ago, they were merely husband and wife in name only, a contract couple bound by duty and devoid of closeness, their hearts and lives separate, as cold and unyielding as the winter thorns that once divided them. It had all begun with a devastating war, a conflict that tore through the land, leaving deep, unhealing scars. In the year 1374 of the new calendar, the Orion Empire plunged into a terrifying succession crisis, its king passing without naming an heir, leaving a power vacuum ripe for betrayal. The court became a nest of vipers, each faction battling for control amidst the escalating political tension. Seizing this perilous opportunity, the neighboring nation of Elisha, Alessia's homeland, made its move, plotting to annex the Orion Empire's southern territories. What followed was an overwhelming, 5-year struggle that claimed countless lives and scorched entire regions. Yet, the relentless, agonizing conflict finally met its end through the formidable might of the then 23-year-old Grand Duke, Eric Lanthimos. His presence on the battlefield, a solitary figure amidst the debris of countless fallen weapons, was the undeniable force that concluded the war, unknowingly sealing a destiny that would forever bind him to Alessia in a marriage born of conquest. On that monumental day, the city buzzed with anticipation. Commoners and nobles alike had gathered since the crack of dawn, their eager faces turned towards the castle, awaiting their hero's triumphant return. Confetti rained down as a grand banner bearing a soaring emblem unfurled across the blue sky. Then he appeared, Eric, the valiant hero in gleaming armor who'd saved their nation, astride his powerful steed. Beside him, huddled in a white hooded cloak, was the third princess of Illyria, Alessia. Her beautiful eyes, framed by soft pink hair, seemed to hold a sorrowful gaze, a silent testament to her fate. She was a symbol of shame. Alessia Kalunda, the most unpopular spoil of war this hero had acquired. Even in the hushed opulence of the palace, when a member of the Viscount Sarant family offered greetings, addressing her as Grand Duchess, the new title felt like another chain. Alessia simply bowed her head, the heavy weight of her new reality settling deep within her heart. Princess Alessia, her delicate features flushed with shame, stammered a hesitant welcome, foreign syllables catching in her throat. A chorus of cruel laughter echoed through the hall, shadowy figures sneering her pronunciation was awful. It's been 3 years, and she still can't even speak the official language properly. Is she really royalty? They mocked. A venomous voice added, "What do you expect? They're just a bunch of barbarians." Alessia bowed her head, her spirit shrinking under their relentless prejudice, her hands clenching in her gown. Just then, a deep voice slashed through the clamor. Alessia, Grand Duke Lanthimos, the hero Eric, had arrived. He exuded an undeniable aura of authority as a courtier informed him of his mother's arrival. Eric's piercing blue eyes found Alessia's, and with unspoken understanding, he offered, "You may leave the party early if you wish." Her response was a small, almost inaudible yes, a fragile acceptance of his quiet mercy amidst the humiliation. Eric's gaze lingered on Alessia, a subtle shift in his usually composed features. "Is something wrong?" he inquired, his voice a low hum amidst the distant murmurs of the court. Alessia, her delicate features cast downward, offered a quick, "No, it's nothing." She gently clutched at the fabric of her dress, her cheeks still holding a faint, traitorous blush from some unacknowledged emotion. Eric simply watched her, his piercing blue eyes searching, before his expression softened into a quiet, "I see." Their union had always been a fragile, political marriage, a cold symbol of peace between two nations, devoid of true connection. She'd stood apart at the grand reception, nursing a glass of wine, a silent figure amid the elegant, bustling crowd, her back to him. Neither of them knew it at the time, not then, in those stark, formal moments, that in a few short hours, this desolate relationship would transform into a fervent honeymoon. A breathtaking moment of abandon would ignite, pulling her pink-haired form into Eric's embrace, their lips meeting with an urgent, undeniable hunger. The lavish palace, grand and imposing, stood as a testament to the power that bound Alessia. Within its ornate walls, amidst the hushed clinking of porcelain, Alessia spotted a familiar figure. "Mother," she called out, a desperate plea subtly woven into her tone. The elegant woman, her rosy hair styled beneath a wide hat, turned, her gaze cool and appraising. "Oh, Alessia," she acknowledged, a faint, almost dismissive smile gracing her lips. "My, you look completely different now." Her eyes swept over Alessia's form. Every bit the aristocratic lady. "One would never guess you were once the daughter abandoned by her own father." The words, sharp and unfeeling, pierced Alessia's heart, reopening old wounds. Her shoulders sagged, the weight of unsaid burdens pressing down. "Mother," Alessia whispered, her pink-hued hair falling forward to hide her face. "I can't take it anymore." But her mother's attention had already shifted, her eyes landing on the shimmering ring adorning Alessia's finger. "Oh my, did the Grand Duke give you this?" Alessia's gaze fell upon the intricate emerald earring as her mother's gloved hand adjusted the piece. Her mother murmured its beauty, how well it complemented her complexion. Observing a good life, Alessia knew was a lie. The inevitable, sharp question followed. How was her marriage? Alessia lowered her head, her pink hair a curtain, her voice a fragile whisper. "The same as always." Her mother's patience wore thin. "We haven't seen each other in so long." And that's all you're interested in? She pressed, her tone hardening. Leaning closer, she commanded, "Listen here, Alessia. 3 years of marriage and still no news of a pregnancy? Grasp the urgency of your situation. If the Grand Duke takes a mistress and has a child, it's all over for you." Despair washed over Alessia. Her hands clenched, knuckles white. "There's nothing I can do," she confessed, voice thick with helplessness. "He's always busy with military affairs. I only see him a few times a year. When he's not here, the servants find ways to torment me." The bustling court faded, leaving her isolated in her opulent prison. Alessia's thoughts were a relentless cascade of torment. They'd slashed her finest clothes, defiled her bed with cold water, and a third of her meals arrived practically rotten. Her voice, a fragile whisper choked with despair, erupted into a desperate plea. "I want to go home, Mother. I don't want to be in this place anymore." A sharp impact, a stinging sound, echoed as her mother's hand struck her face, silencing her. Her mother loomed over her, eyes cold and unyielding. "Go home? To where exactly? How could you possibly forget the life you once had?" Alessia crumpled further to the opulent floor. "Do you truly believe you, an illegitimate child, can just waltz back and continue on as a princess?" Her mother's words were a whip. "Wake up. Instead of wasting time playing the tragic heroine, you should be thinking of a way to solidify your position as the Grand Duchess." Alessia's soft brown eyes, brimming with unshed tears, stared at the gilded floor, the crushing weight of her reality settling deep within her soul. "Mother is right," Alessia conceded with a hollow sigh, the weight of the past 3 years pressing down on her. Time had blurred, leaving her to romanticize an era long gone, a desperate escape from the suffocating present. She sat alone, a solitary figure in the grand room, the geometric shadows of the window gracing the elegant floor, a stark reminder of her confinement. Her very existence, a life as an illegitimate child, had been a grueling journey, a relentless heck from its inception. She'd learned early to guard her heart, to expect only hardship. Then came Ilish's defeat, a cataclysm that tore her world asunder and thrust her into this loveless union, leaving her spirit as barren as the war-scarred landscape outside. The whispers of the past echoed, promising only more torment. Grand Duke Lanthimos, in a calculated move for peace, had personally proposed a political marriage. Yet, the legitimate first and second princesses, with their pride intact, naturally refused such a humiliating arrangement, deeming it beneath them. The burden, therefore, fell squarely upon Alessia, the ignored third princess. And so, the despised, illegitimate child was suddenly elevated to the status of a princess, swiftly betrothed to the Grand Duke. For her mother, this was a triumphant moment. She finally grasped the noblewoman's life she'd always yearned for, coins clinking a silent affirmation of her ambition. For her mother's assent, Alessia understood she had to become a prisoner, confined within this gilded cage, watching the world through a window latticed with thorns. She stood in her opulent room, a haunting echo of her mother's voice ringing in her ears. "This is my gift to you," her mother had stated with a chilling smile. "Don't forget, you have no home to return to." The words were a stark, cold reminder that her very existence was now a transaction. A gift? Alessia wondered, her mother's chilling words, labeling her very existence a transaction, still echoing. Her fingers unconsciously traced the rim of a delicate cup, its contents a shimmering, crimson liquid, stirring a potent memory. Her soft brown eyes, usually so guarded, held a flicker of deep unease as the image of a spilled vial and its intoxicating brew resurfaced, the true catalyst for everything. Meanwhile, Eric stood in the bustling court, his demeanor as unyielding as ever. An advisor presented political details. "The travel dates for our visit to the Duchy of Pem have been decided," he stated. "The surrounding nations have agreed to the treaty, but a few hardline opposition factions remain. Most of them are loyal to the old regime." Eric listened, his piercing blue eyes fixed, utterly focused. "I've had the details compiled into a document for you. Please look it over later." The advisor handed him a parchment, oblivious to the emotional tempest Alessia navigated, or the profound shift now taking root in Eric's own world. Eric, his composure momentarily fractured, turned back as an advisor cautiously inquired if something was amiss. The courtier explained that her ladyship's mother had already departed, leaving the Grand Duchess in her opulent quarters. Alessia, he added, should still be inside, yet there had been no response despite his repeated knocking. A fresh wave of worry washed over Eric's sharp features, his piercing blue eyes now fixed on the closed door. He called out Alessia's name, his voice laced with an unfamiliar urgency, demanding an answer. Inside, Alessia lay, her chest rising and falling erratically, beads of perspiration tracing paths down her skin, struggling with an unseen torment. Eric's hand gripped the doorknob, surprise flashing across his face when he realized it was unlocked. This uncharacteristic vulnerability from Alessia only fueled his concern, deepening the profound shift that had begun within him. He pushed the door open, announcing his entry with a firm, tender declaration. "Alessia," he murmured, his gaze sweeping the room, desperately seeking her. Her delicate features were flushed, a deep, fiery blush painting her cheeks and collarbone as beads of sweat glistened on her skin. Alessia's long, flowing pink hair spilled across the silken sheets, a vibrant contrast to her pale, aristocratic complexion now overcome with a feverish glow. Her soft brown eyes, usually reserved, were squeezed shut in a mix of ecstasy and torment, her lips parted in a silent gasp, as if trying to draw breath from the burning air around her. Her hands, adorned with the Grand Duke's ring, instinctively clutched at the fine fabric of her nightwear, a desperate attempt to ground herself against the tide of sensation that threatened to consume her. Every nerve ending sang with an unfamiliar, undeniable urgency, a fierce heat igniting an intensity she hadn't known she possessed, fueled by the cursed Aphrodisiac. As Eric's voice echoed in the room, a new layer of complicated turmoil began to stir within her. A searing heat consumed Alessia, making her pant uncontrollably as she lay on the opulent floor, her gown disheveled. "So hot," she gasped, the cursed Aphrodisiac taking a fierce hold. Just then, Eric's voice, full of a new, intense warmth, echoed from beyond the door. "Alessia," he called, declaring, "I'm coming in." Panic flared through her, a desperate urge to conceal her vulnerability. "Wait," she managed to whisper, her heart pounding. The soft click of the door's latch sent a fresh wave of dread through her. "No, don't," she cried out, clutching her head, utterly exposed in her torment. Eric entered, his piercing blue eyes sweeping over her disarrayed form. "What are you doing in there?" he asked, a shadow of concern crossing his sharp features. Mortified, Alessia forced out, "I'm sorry, there's a situation. Could you please use another room?" It was a fragile plea, a desperate attempt to maintain control and hide the truth of her burning predicament from him. Eric's keen eyes narrowed as he noticed the tremor in Alessia's voice. He asked if her mother had spoken harshly, his gaze lingering on her flushed face, which was now damp with perspiration. He questioned if she was ill, but she quickly denied it. When he persisted, suggesting her mother must have scolded her, Alessia vehemently refuted it, her hands rising instinctively. "It's nothing," she insisted, her voice tight with strain. "So please don't ask any more questions." Her tone bordered on frantic, a desperate plea to keep her secret hidden. Eric watched her, a profound shift settling in his piercing blue eyes. Outside, a cluster of advisors murmured, one cautiously inquiring about the commotion. Eric's voice, now firm and unyielding, slashed through the hallway's whispers. He commanded Alessia to open the door, his jaw set with grim resolve, declaring he would use his sword to open it if she refused. A fierce determination etched his features. Eric's voice, sharp and unyielding, sliced through the heavy silence, a chilling declaration echoing in the opulent room. "I'm going to count to 3, he stated, each word a hammer blow against Alessia's already frayed nerves. Her soft brown eyes, wide with disbelief, fixated on the door as a fresh wave of panic washed over her. From beyond, a metallic scrape signaled his resolve. Eric's hand had closed around his sword, the hilt glinting with ominous intent. 1. Alessia gasped, her mind racing in a desperate scramble. Slash the door down. Is he truly serious? Her delicate frame trembled, and she huddled further on the rich, patterned floor, clutching herself. 2. Dark, thorny tendrils of fear wrapped around her. If he genuinely forced entry, everyone would witness her in this horrifying, disgraceful state, exposing her vulnerability for all the court to mock. 3. A fierce, resolute glint illuminated Eric's piercing blue eye as his sword began to slide from its sheath with a low, menacing rasp. The grand doors slowly started to give way, revealing a sliver of his determined figure pushing through. Alessia's trembling hand pushed against the giving door, her voice a desperate whisper. "Don't," she pleaded, a futile attempt to halt Eric's relentless advance. His jaw remained set, but as the door surrendered, revealing her distressed form, her next words were a fragile, contradictory request. "Just you, come in alone." His piercing blue eyes, now burning with an unreadable intensity, absorbed her plea, a subtle flush coloring his features. Inside, Alessia was overwhelmed, her face glistening, her breathing shallow as she whispered, "Please." The room, heavy with the scent of flowers, swirled around her. Outside, an advisor approached Eric, uttering, "Your Grace." But Eric, his focus solely on Alessia, dismissed him with a curt, uncharacteristic command. "Take Charles and the guests somewhere else." The hallway doors clicked shut, a final, definitive sound. An overturned hourglass lay abandoned, time suspended for the unfolding drama within. Eric, now within the chamber, saw a delicate hand, bathed in an ethereal glow, seemingly reach out to him. He knelt, a golden goblet held firmly in his grasp, his gaze unwavering, acknowledging the profound shift in their shared reality. A dizzying flush consumed Alessia, a searing inferno ignited by the cursed Aphrodisiac. Her breath came in ragged gasps, every nerve alight. Eric's voice slashed through the haze, a deep concern lacing his question as he murmured, "Alessia?" He reached for her, pulling her close, his strong arms supporting her as she swayed against him. The heat radiating from her own skin was suffocating, yet a strange, desperate instinct drew her to the faint coolness emanating from his fingertips as he grazed her cheek. She remembered how his touch used to feel, always cool, distant, and every time he'd reached for her, her fallen form would instinctively recoil. But now, amidst this inferno, that very coolness was the only anchor she craved, the solitary thing that could possibly save her from the torment. Her fingers, trembling, instinctively sought his hand. Eric's piercing blue eyes fixed on her, an unreadable depth to his gaze as his hand subtly tightened. Alessia's breath hitched, her flushed face turned into the gentle caress of a hand that wasn't her own. Her eyes, heavy-lidded, seemed to question the very air, an unspoken, profound, "But then why?" echoing in her mind. Why was this happening? Why, after 3 years of icy silence, did his touch now ignite such a forbidden heat within her? The soft pink petals drifting past did little to cool the fire coursing through her veins. Meanwhile, Eric's own gaze was clouded, a raw intensity burning in his blue eyes. Sweat slicked his brow, his usually composed features contorted in a mixture of surprise and profound discomfort. A silent plea escaped him, wondering, why is he today burning up as if his fallen form is on fire? He felt the same inferno that consumed her, a shared torment that was rapidly blurring the lines of their carefully constructed distance. This unexpected, shared vulnerability threatened to shatter everything they knew. A chilling realization slashed through the haze as Alessia recognized the sweet, cloying scent of seduction incense. It was a dark, complicated legacy, the very method her mother, desperate to survive the red light district, had used to secure her position as the king of Ilish's mistress. Now, that same potent powder had passed from her mother's hands to hers, and its effects were overwhelming. Her mind felt foggy and distant, every coherent thought dissolving into smoke. An agonizing sensitivity coursed through her. Each brush of fabric against her skin felt like a jolt of pure electricity, making it impossible to even process Eric's words. A frantic voice inside her screamed, pleading for her to get a hold of herself, but it was already a losing battle against the overwhelming heat that was rapidly consuming her will. The fiery heat that had consumed Alessia now fueled a desperate intensity, blurring the carefully constructed lines of their distance. Eric, his resolve etched deeply into his features, declared that these clothes, these flimsy barriers, were utterly in the way. A soft sigh escaped Alessia's lips as his skilled fingers worked at the fastenings, the delicate fabric sliding away, leaving her vulnerable and exposed beneath his unwavering gaze. Her breath hitched, ragged and shallow, as the last remnants of her resistance dissolved into the overwhelming longing. Later, a frantic, "Ah, seriously," echoed within Alessia's mind, a furious internal scolding for the surrender she'd just experienced. She felt her face burn with a blush, turning away from Eric's intense, unwavering stare. A soft huff escaped her, a mixture of mortification and a lingering, unwanted tremor that pulsed through her veins. He watched her, his piercing blue eyes now filled with a warmth she'd never seen, a gentle concern softening his sharp features. The sudden shift in their reality felt utterly overwhelming, threatening to unravel everything she thought she knew about their loveless union. Eric's voice was a low murmur against her hair, filled with a pained resolve as he asked her to forgive him for acting while she was so clearly suffering. But through her choked sobs, Alessia cried out that he was wrong. This wasn't about him at all. Tears streamed down her flushed face as she confessed her humiliating struggle. She couldn't even get her own belt off. The situation was just awful. She wondered if this overwhelming emotion was just because of the powder, but a deeper truth was surfacing. All the frustrations she had bottled up for years were erupting, her heart feeling like it would burst from the pressure. As she wept, a distant memory surfaced, shadowy figures looming over her, their cruel taunts echoing in her mind. Her tears weren't just for now. They were for the child who was never allowed to cry. The past bled into the present, a chilling memory of a little girl lost in a cavernous hall. She recalled how no matter how many tears she shed, no matter how much she screamed for her mother, her pleas were simply swallowed by the cold, magnificent palace. Her mother, a distant, elegant figure, remained utterly absorbed in her own reflection, deaf to the child's desperate sobs. But now, things were different. Eric's gentle voice broke through the painful reverie, his piercing blue eyes filled with genuine concern as he asked what had happened. A strange, unfamiliar thought crossed Alessia's mind as her hand rested against his chest. Looking at the man before her, she wondered if, just for this one moment, it was finally okay to be a little selfish. Alessia's cheeks burned a delicate rose, tears still clinging to her lashes as Eric's hand, unexpectedly gentle, cupped her face. The closeness was overwhelming, blurring the edges of her carefully guarded composure. He leaned closer, his voice a low, husky murmur, hinting at a longing for fewer layers between them next time. She could only manage a breathless, "Okay." Yet, the tender moment fractured as his gaze deepened, his grip on the silk beside her tightening, knuckles white. He spoke her name, a profound intensity in his voice. "When tomorrow comes," he began, his fingers brushing restlessly against his own jaw, "will you regret what happens tonight?" Before she could form a reply, Eric's lips claimed hers, a hungry, desperate, tender moment that stole her breath. A soft gasp escaped her as her hands instinctively rose, not to push away, but to find purchase against his jawline, a silent acknowledgement of the overwhelming rush that consumed her. The world spun into a maelstrom of touch and sensation. The first rays of dawn pierced through the grand window, bathing the chamber in a gentle, golden light, a stark contrast to the tumultuous reality Alessia was slowly stirring into. Her long, pink hair fanned across the pristine sheets as she lay in a deep slumber, an ethereal beauty unaware of the storm brewing within her subconscious. A soft rustle of silk, a faint flicker behind her eyelids, and then her eyes snapped open, a vivid green reflecting a sudden, horrifying clarity. It wasn't a dream. The memories of the previous night surged forth, a dizzying collage of intense sensations and raw emotion. She recalled Eric's piercing gaze, his firm yet tender touch, the way their bodies had moved together as one, consumed by an inferno of intensity. The sepia-toned fragments replayed in her mind, his hand cradling her face, her head against his chest, the close sighs, the desperate closeness. Then came the image of herself, small and overwhelmed, clutching a pillow in the aftermath, utterly lost in the weight of what had transpired. No way, she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. It can't be. A wave of heat washed over her face, not from longing, but from a profound shame and panic. No, the fervent denial ripped from her, her eyes wide with a desperate disbelief, rejecting the undeniable truth of their shared closeness. A chilling memory surfaced, replaying the cold promises Eric had made at the start of their union. He'd acknowledged that their marriage wasn't her choice, vowing never to lay a single finger on her unless she wished it. All he had asked was for her to endure their arrangement for 4 years, after which she would finally be free. But that carefully constructed boundary, the very foundation of her survival in this foreign land, had been utterly demolished in a single night. The thought sent a fresh wave of panic through Alessia. They were supposed to be a contract couple, nothing more. How could she possibly face him now, after everything that had happened? The shame was a suffocating weight. Just then, a soft knock echoed through the chamber. A maid peeked inside, her voice gentle as she asked if her lady was awake, pulling Alessia from her spiral of despair. The gentle voice of an unfamiliar maid inquired if something was the matter, pulling Alessia from her lingering despair. "Oh, and no, I'm fine," she replied, her voice still shaky with raw emotion. "And you are?" Alessia asked, her gaze settling on the small figure. The maid, Martha, curtsied politely, explaining it was her first day and she'd been assigned to Alessia. "Does that displease you?" Martha asked cautiously. Alessia felt a surprising wave of relief. Martha seemed remarkably kinder, a comforting contrast to the cruel shadows of her past. "Not at all," she managed, a faint, fragile smile gracing her lips. As Alessia attempted to rise, her legs, still trembling from the night's closeness and her own emotional turmoil, betrayed her. Her bare feet took a hesitant step, but her knees buckled. A startled gasp escaped Martha's lips. "My lady," she cried, rushing forward as Alessia crumpled onto the cold floor, her dark hair fanning out around her. Martha steadied the princess, her voice laced with worry as she asked if her lady was feeling unwell. Leaning heavily against her maid, Alessia tried to wave off the concern, insisting she was fine, just suddenly feeling weak. But a mortifying heat rushed to her cheeks as the true reason for her exhaustion dawned on her. There was only one possible explanation. As they shuffled down the sunlit corridor, a deep voice suddenly offered his shoulder for support, but Alessia flinched, weakly refusing without even looking. She grit her teeth, her stomach growling in protest. She'd used up far too much energy the night before, and now she'd missed breakfast entirely. All of this, she fumed silently, was entirely his fault. A powerful crash echoed through the archway as wooden shards flew, scattering in every direction. Eric, his short dark hair slightly disheveled, moved with a raw, desperate urgency, his sword still secured at his side. He'd heard Martha's startled cry, the sound an unwelcome jolt to his already frayed nerves. His piercing blue eyes, usually so stoic, now held a deep, unreadable intensity, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his sharp features. He pushed through the remnants, driven by an instinct he couldn't suppress. The Grand Duke," Martha gasped, her hand flying to her mouth in surprise, her glasses askew. She'd been bending over Alessia, who was still crumpled on the cold floor, her dark hair a tangled mess around her. Alessia, her face flushed with a mixture of shame and a new, unsettling flutter, felt her breath catch. The sight of him, his intense gaze fixed solely on her, sent a fresh wave of panic through her already tumultuous heart. She averted her soft brown eyes, a delicate hand rising to her chest, as if to calm the frantic beat within. The vibrant garden around them, blooming with white flowers, only heightened the stark contrast of her inner turmoil. Alessia mentally urged herself to calm down, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She was his wife, after all. What had transpired between them last night was normal, right? She repeated the soothing mantra, even as her fallen form trembled, seeking refuge behind a stone column in the garden. She pressed a hand to her mouth, her soft brown eyes wide with a desperate need to disappear. Then, a familiar voice, deeper and closer than she anticipated, shattered her fragile composure. "What are you doing here?" Eric stood before her, his piercing blue eyes sharp, catching her mid-panic. A stifled scream ripped from her throat. Kaya, her mind raced, fumbling for an explanation. She stammered, well, I was just passing by." The words felt utterly hollow. Before he could press further, she launched into a desperate apology, bowing deeply until her forehead almost touched her knees. "I'm so sorry." Behind her, Martha, her maid, gasped, rushing forward in alarm. "My lady." Eric, however, simply watched Alessia's exaggerated display, a subtle, almost imperceptible flush rising to his cheeks as he tried to process her bizarre reaction. He remained still, a picture of quiet intensity. The advisor approached Eric, respectfully asking if his meal should be brought to his study again today. Eric, usually so composed, shifted almost imperceptibly, a faint bead of sweat at his temple. His gaze was distant, yet there was a new intensity to his expression. Meanwhile, Alessia, with her vibrant pink hair framing a face still flushed from the morning's tumultuous thoughts, pressed a delicate hand to her chest. Her green eyes, wide and searching, reflected a fragile vulnerability she rarely showed. He offered a firm, quiet reply, "No, that won't be necessary." He turned away, his hand lifting to brush against his cheek, a subtle blush betraying a hint of discomfort or perhaps a burgeoning emotion. Then, with a resolve that surprised even himself, he declared, "Today, I will have lunch with Alessia." Two maids, trays heavy with prepared dishes, paused in the hallway, exchanging a glance of quiet astonishment. Across the grand dining hall, Alessia sat rigidly at the table, her mind reeling. Her internal thoughts screamed, "Why? Why is this happening?" She stared blankly at the ornate table, utterly bewildered by Eric's sudden, dramatic shift. Alessia's mind drifted back to the stark reality of their past, a chilling contrast to Eric's bewildering present. Lord Eric had always used work as a convenient excuse, a shield to avoid her. She recalled him striding away, his blue cape a blur, leaving her alone in vast, echoing halls. They'd never even shared a single meal in their 3 years of marriage. Why? She'd always wondered, picturing his distant, melancholic gaze. His sudden transformation was affecting everyone. An advisor, buried under documents, likely pondered, "Why does it have to be today, of all days?" Eric's unwavering focus had simply vanished. A kind maid later placed a tray of fresh pastries and fruit before Alessia. "Thank you," Alessia murmured, her voice soft. The maid, with a thoughtful expression, leaned in. "My lady, please don't hesitate to let me know if you need anything." A concerned courtier stood nearby. Alessia's delicate features showed a flicker of surprise, then renewed turmoil, as a soft, "Oh," escaped her lips. The tension was a suffocating shroud in the opulent dining hall, clinging to every rich fabric and gleaming surface. Alessia sat rigidly at one end of the long table, the lavish spread of sweet and savory dishes an overwhelming display between her and Eric, who watched her intently from the opposite end. He noticed her hesitation, his usually distant gaze now laced with a subtle concern. He quietly wondered if the meal wasn't to her liking, offering to have something else prepared for her. Alessia's eyes widened in alarm, her hands flying up in a frantic, almost comical denial. "No, no," she insisted, "not at all," though her racing heart betrayed her. Despite her outward protests, a delicate bite of a pastry, rich and unfamiliar, brought a soft flush to her cheeks. It was undeniably delicious. Her mind reeled. This opulent feast, unlike anything she'd ever been offered before, felt like the first time she was truly treated in a manner befitting the Grand Duchess. The sudden, overwhelming respect left her utterly bewildered, realizing even the sharp-eyed maids were experts at reading the room and this undeniable shift in dynamics. A bitter thought gnawed at Alessia. No matter how much they'd neglected her in the past, now that she was sitting at the same table as the noble Grand Duke, they'd do whatever it took to curry favor. She was merely a means to an end. It felt like she was selling her fallen form to survive, forever trapped and ultimately following the same tragic path as her mother. Her back was to the world. Vibrant roses, beautiful yet thorny, seemed to cage her in. She carried a profound sadness, etched deep within her soft features. The delicate clink of a fork against a porcelain plate barely registered. Eric's voice, now laced with a soft concern she was still unaccustomed to, gently broke the silence. "What's wrong?" he asked. She didn't meet his gaze, her voice quiet. "I don't have much of an appetite," she replied, a faint tremor in her words. Then, as if an afterthought, she added, "I'm sorry." Eric watched her, his piercing blue eyes holding a complex mix of worry and an unwavering devotion, a deep emotion that was both startling and utterly bewildering to Alessia. He said nothing, but his steady gaze spoke volumes. The heavy silence at the breakfast table was finally broken. Eric's piercing gaze, shadowed with an unreadable mix of remorse and worry, remained fixed solely on Alessia. His voice was low, yet it carried an intensity that made the air crackle as he asked her if he had hurt her the night before. The question, so shockingly close and completely out of character, shattered the room's formal decorum. The butler's hands trembled, nearly dropping the heavy teapot, while a nearby maid gasped and fumbled with her tray, sending a cup clattering to the floor. Every servant froze, their faces a perfect picture of horrified disbelief. Across the table, Alessia's mind went completely blank. Her cheeks flushed as she stared back, utterly speechless, a single, bewildered sound escaping her lips. Alessia's world tilted on its axis, her mind short-circuiting as his words hung in the air. Her eyes swirled with frantic confusion, the room dissolving around her. What was he saying? She couldn't process it. In the 3 years since their frigid union, they had never once shared a meal outside of stiff, formal family dinners. Now, this public spectacle. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she felt the prying eyes of the staff. The maids were already whispering, their gossip a low hum in the background of her mounting panic. Her hands twisted the delicate fabric of her dress, her knuckles turning white. Why would he bring up such a sensitive, private matter in front of everyone? The thought escalated into a terrifying suspicion. Was he saying this on purpose? Was this some cruel, calculated attempt to humiliate her? But as her internal world crumbled, the maid swooned, imagining a perfect couple finally united. Eric's dark brows furrowed, a flicker of understanding, or perhaps a new, firm resolve, sparking in his piercing blue eyes as an idea solidified in his mind. Without a moment's hesitation, his voice, now infused with an undeniable authority, slashed through the buzzing whispers of the room. "Everyone, leave us," he commanded, his gaze sweeping over the startled courtiers and maids. They scrambled, a flurry of rustling silks and hushed footsteps, quickly retreating from the room. The ornate door clicked shut, sealing them in a sudden silence. Eric took a breath, his shoulders relaxing slightly as he turned back to Alessia, his gaze softening. "Now we're alone," he stated, his voice lower, more close. Alessia's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm of dread. Too late, her mind screamed, despair bubbling up inside her. This moment, this forced solitude with him, felt terrifyingly irreversible. Eric clasped his hands, his expression one of profound earnestness. "About yesterday, I am truly sorry," he began, his voice laced with a raw sincerity that both surprised and unnerved Alessia. "It all happened so suddenly, and I couldn't control myself." He looked down, a shadow of regret crossing his striking features, yet the unwavering devotion in his blue eyes remained clear. Alessia, feeling small and utterly overwhelmed, vividly recalled Eric's initial, gentle inquiry if she was hurt anywhere, and her own shaky reassurance that she was fine. The memory of the accidental incense, a gift from her mother, brought a fresh wave of mortification. Her mother, ever so concerned about the lack of an heir, had only intensified Alessia's unspoken burden. Eric had then asked, with an unexpected softness, if she even wanted a child, a question that sent a silent, panicked "no, I would never," echoing through her mind. The heavy silence stretched between them, both looking down at the table, a chasm of unspoken emotions. Alessia couldn't bear it any longer. She finally erupted, declaring with a desperate intensity that it was all just an accident. Her hands clenched on the delicate fabric of her dress as she pleaded for them to simply pretend it had never happened. She concluded, her voice barely steady. That was all she had to say on the matter, turning sharply to escape the suffocating room. But Eric, his piercing blue eyes now clouded with an unfamiliar hurt, reached out, a desperate, "Wait, Alessia," tearing through the tense silence. Eric's fingers carefully enveloped Alessia's, a gentle warmth seeping into her skin. She didn't pull away immediately, though a tremor ran through her as his intense gaze held her captive. He leaned closer, his dark hair almost brushing her pink locks, his piercing blue eyes clouded with a deep concern. "I hope," he murmured, his voice a low confession, "you won't come to hate me." Alessia's breath hitched, her soft brown eyes widening in bewildered surprise. The idea of hating him felt complicated, stirring a profound internal turmoil. Her fingers subtly tightened on her dress, a silent struggle playing out. When he extended his hand again, his gaze unwavering and full of fragile hope, Alessia whispered, "Oh, okay." A flush creeping up her delicate cheeks. A soft, almost imperceptible smile touched Eric's lips, his eyes closing for a brief moment of profound relief. His gaze, now filled with renewed devotion, met hers. "Thank you," he said, the simple words carrying a weight of gratitude that startled her anew. Her mind replayed the phantom touch of hands, fingers hesitantly intertwining, then separating, only for a silent reach to linger in the air. Each imagined brush was a poignant echo of the closeness she couldn't quite grasp. A soft rustle broke her reverie. A maid curtsied, her voice demure. "Well then, if you'll excuse me." Alessia offered a quiet yes, welcoming the sudden solitude. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of the grand hall, Eric stood rigid. His usually sharp features were drawn, shadowed as he stared at the ornate patterns on the wall, completely lost in thought. A wave of profound shame, or perhaps overwhelming emotion, washed over him. He lifted his hands, burying his face in them, as if to physically conceal the intensity of his burgeoning feelings, or to escape the raw vulnerability of his confession. The hero, once so composed, was utterly undone. The hushed whispers of the maids echoed through the courtyard, their minds fixated on the unbelievable sight they had just witnessed. He had actually touched her, not out of cold duty, but with an unmistakable affection that sent ripples of shock through the entire staff. The endless murmuring finally grated on one maid's nerves. The fiery-haired Sylvia spun around, her voice sharp with irritation as she demanded they stop whispering behind her back. However, her outburst was met not with silence, but with a direct challenge. Another maid's gaze was steady and serious as she reminded Sylvia of what they'd all seen. "You saw how her ladyship was today, didn't you?" She pressed, her words a clear warning. "Maybe you should tone it down, especially you, Sylvia." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and pointed. "You were the one who tormented her the most." A slender hand gripped ornate golden scissors, a resolute glint reflecting off the polished metal as she declared she wasn't backing down. Her eyes narrowed, a cold fire burning within them as she faced her nervous colleague, vowing to make it perfectly clear. The other maid, pale and wide-eyed, could only watch, a tremor running through her. A wicked smile twisted Sylvia's lips, her red hair a fiery halo around a face now devoid of pretense. She would show everyone that Alessia was nothing but a useless piece of trash. Her gaze was sharp, filled with venomous intent. With a swift, decisive motion, the scissors sliced through delicate fabric, and a lily, symbolizing purity or innocence, lay discarded, its petals scattered on the ground. A chilling promise had been made manifest. Sunlight streamed into the room, but Princess Alessia's attention was locked on the dark blemish near her collarbone. It looked even more vivid than it had yesterday. A sudden, embarrassing memory of her innocent maid asking if she'd been bitten by an insect sent a wave of heat through her, and she choked back a cough. She was lucky Martha was so naive. Desperate, Alessia grabbed a powder puff, frantically trying to conceal the evidence before Martha arrived. But it was too late. The door swung open without warning. Alessia whipped around, her eyes wide with shock. "Ah, Martha, wait a moment," she stammered, her heart pounding. Had she truly just walked in without even knocking? Alessia's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the woman in the doorway. She demanded to know why Sylvia was here. With a condescending tilt of her head, Sylvia coolly questioned if there was some problem with her presence. Alessia stammered, insisting that wasn't what she meant, and desperately asked what had happened to Martha. Sylvia's smile was sharp as she declared herself Alessia's personal maid, explaining that Martha was merely a temporary fill-in. A cold fury washed over the princess. This was the woman behind most of her torment, growing more audacious because Alessia never fought back. She'd considered telling Eric, but she just couldn't. Seated in the dim light, Martha didn't even flinch under the princess's glare. Her voice was pure ice. "So what?" she fired back, her fist clenching in defiance. "What do you want me to do about it?" Alessia recoiled, biting her lip to swallow the furious retort that burned in her throat. Seeing the princess's surrender, a venomous smirk spread across Martha's face. "I understand," she sneered, her tone laced with mockery. She then moved behind Alessia to dress her, her hands deliberately yanking the corset strings with punishing force. With one final, intense tug, she left the princess gasping for air, a prisoner in her own gown. "What do you think you're doing?" Alessia's voice, though strained, slashed through the quiet, her eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and pain. Martha just offered a sickeningly sweet smile, feigning innocence. "What do I mean? I'm simply helping you put on your corset, princess." Her words were a veiled barb. "I've told you countless times, in the Orion Empire, a lady must wear a corset." Alessia's breath hitched, her frame trembling. Martha leaned in, her gaze sharp and cold. With a sagging chest and slumped posture, you'll be a laughingstock, dragging the Grand Duke's name through the mud. You can barely speak our language, and you can't even fulfill your role as a pretty ornament. Don't you feel any shame? Each word was an overwhelming, calculated strike, leaving Alessia utterly shattered. Alessia's world had shrunk to a crushing fixation on weight and appearance, a legacy of tormentors like Sylvia. Her worth was brutally reduced to these numbers. Eating felt like a sin as she silently pleaded, "Why can't I lose weight?" Then, a sharp, surprising voice burst through her despair. A new maid gasped, clutching the very corset that defined Alessia's suffering. Is this a corset?" Alessia tentatively inquired if it was true women were disgraced without one, trapped by old beliefs. The maid's reply was in blast of shock. "What era are you talking about?" She swiftly dismantled the lie, revealing how corsets caused significant harm. "Nobody wears these things anymore," she declared. "Where did you even get this?" Alessia's eyes widened, a universe of false burdens shattering. "My lady," the maid gently prompted, witnessing the profound shift. In that stunning moment, the truth crashed down on Alessia. There was never any shame to begin with. This woman had masterfully weaponized the princess's own inferiority complex to control her, pushing her deeper into a mire of self-loathing. She had been far too weak, but not anymore. The maid snapped impatiently, demanding to know what she wanted. Alessia's gaze hardened, her hand clenching into a tight fist at her side. Her voice, once timid, was now laced with ice as she announced, "You're fired." Martha reeled, her face twisting from shock to pure rage. "Fired?" she shrieked. "Who do you think you are?" The question echoed in the room, but this time, Alessia knew the answer. With newfound fire, Alessia's voice boomed through the chamber. She declared her name and title, reminding the stunned maid that she was the lawful wife of the Grand Duke and the true mistress of the house. Coldly, she listed every one of Martha's transgressions, abandoning her post, constant negligence, and the painfully tight corset. With a powerful shove, she sent the maid stumbling, screaming that there was no escape. Seething, Martha shrieked back, venomously questioning when Alessia had ever possessed such authority. A chilling calm settled over the princess. "You think I don't have the authority?" she whispered, before her hands fired to her own gown, gripping the fabric with a sharp, violent motion. With her authority challenged, Martha leaned in close, her voice a venomous whisper. She dared Alessia to settle this in front of the Grand Duke himself. The princess's surge of energy ran cold. Would Eric actually side with her? The cruel maid twisted the knife, sneering that he might just praise a servant as devoted as her. A single, terrifying question echoed in Alessia's mind, causing a bead of sweat to trace down her temple. She wondered, with a heart-stopping lurch of fear, what her husband would truly do. Her newfound confidence was already beginning to fracture. Back in the servants' quarters, chaos erupts. A fiery-haired maid, still reeling from her confrontation with Alessia, shoves a timid, bespectacled girl named Martha forward. With a bitter sneer, she announces Martha's promotion to the Grand Duchess's personal maid, a position she herself clearly wants no part of anymore. After forcing the terrified girl out, the other maids begin to whisper in disbelief. They can't believe the docile princess they all knew actually fought back. The lead maid, clutching her face, snaps defensively, wildly suggesting Alessia must be on some strange substance to have acted with such startling force. A wave of relief washes over Alessia as she throws her arms around her trusted maid, Martha, burying her face in her shoulder and exclaiming how much she'd missed her. Martha, now officially her personal maid, returns the embrace but can't help but ask what happened to Sylvia. Alessia simply replies that it's a long story. Her mind flashes back to the tense confrontation, the way she'd stood her ground, her sudden change in demeanor clearly intimidating the treacherous maid into submission. She's glad Eric wasn't there. She would have frozen. But now, a surprising and unfamiliar feeling of exhilaration bubbles up inside her. Turning to Martha, she asks curiously what the other maids have been saying about her lately. Martha hesitantly explains what she's heard. The maids are now whispering that her ladyship is far more cherished by the Grand Duke than they ever imagined, and they're suggesting to each other that they should probably tone it down. Alessia quietly processes this, her mind racing. Gazing at her reflection, a powerful resolve crystallizes within her. Simply enduring this life won't change anything. She decides she doesn't care if they call her vulgar. She will use every tool at her disposal. Turning to her loyal maid with a confident glint in her eyes, she asks Martha to help her change. Just as her resolve to take control of her own fate solidified, a firm knock echoed from the chamber doors. Her maid, Martha, moved to open it, revealing the imposing figure of Eric standing in the hallway. His piercing eyes scanned the room before locking onto Alessia, a silent intensity in his gaze that made the air feel thick. He asked politely if he might come in, his voice a low rumble that vibrated with unspoken meaning. This was it, her first test. Stealing her nerves, Alessia gave a small nod, her own voice surprisingly steady as she calmly welcomed him in. As they sat together for tea, an aide cried out in alarm, noticing Eric fumbling with his own necktie, as if suddenly finding it restrictive. The Duke, however, ignored him, his piercing gaze fixed on Alessia. He remarked coolly that he'd never seen her in clothes like that. Trying to keep her composure, she explained it was just a small change of pace, a relief after being freed from the shackles of corsets. She then steered the conversation to her purpose, stating she had something to report. After he prompted her to continue, she announced that she had dismissed her personal maid and replaced her with Martha, adding that she'd confirmed with management that there was no issue, apologizing only for reporting it after the fact. Eric simply told her she could do as she pleased in such matters. Alessia stammered, her cheeks flushing as she asked if he truly meant it. Eric's gaze was intense, his voice a low rumble as he simply said her name. He declared that she was his wife, and as such, she had the authority to decide on all matters concerning the estate. Leaning closer, his presence overwhelming, he assured her there was no need to seek his approval. The sudden transfer of power was staggering, but as Alessia turned to look out at the starry night, her shock quickly morphed into a steely resolve. This was her opening. Facing him again, she announced she had one more request. The ghost of her mother's voice echoed in her mind, a stern warning to stop playing the tragic heroine and instead find a way to solidify her position as the Grand Duchess. Alessia knew she was right. To prevent another rival from appearing, she had to win her husband's affection. She had prepared for this, steeling her nerves and taking extra care with her appearance. And yet, faced with Eric's piercing gaze, her carefully constructed plan shattered. Flustered, she blurted out a completely unrelated request to change her language tutor. Mortified by her own awkwardness, she could only stew in embarrassment as Eric simply watched her, an intrigued "oh" on his lips. Leaning back in his chair, Eric thoughtfully considered her request. He explained that there weren't many tutors fluent in the languages of both their nations, so finding a replacement wouldn't be easy. Alessia's posture deflated, her hands twisting together in her lap as she quietly acknowledged the problem. Feeling foolish, She apologized for asking for the impossible. But before her embarrassment could fully take root, Eric's voice slashed in, his tone steady. He clarified that it wasn't entirely impossible. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise and a dawning hope. Seeing her expression, a faint, confident smile touched his lips as he assured her, "Leave it to me." Alessia took a sip of tea, her heart fluttering with relief that he didn't press her for a reason. As Eric watched her, Alessia's mind drifted back to the very reason for her request. Her language tutor, Mrs. Michelle, held a deep-seated contempt for anyone from Elisha, and Alessia was no exception. Their lessons were a farce, with the woman sipping tea indifferently, while Alessia was left to struggle through self-study, preventing any real progress. She recalled one particularly painful memory, when she had humbly asked for help, admitting she'd forgotten how to read a word. The question was met not with guidance, but with pure, unadulterated fury. Mrs. Michelle slammed her teacup down with a sharp crack, her face contorted in rage as she knocked an inkwell over in her tirade. She shrieked at Alessia, questioning how she could dare call herself a princess while being so ignorant. The verbal assault felt like sharp thorns wrapping around her, each word a barb meant to wound her spirit. But as the bitter memory faded, a new feeling bloomed in its place: hope. Alessia realized this was a good thing. With a proper teacher, she could finally learn the language correctly, and maybe, just maybe, the other nobles would stop making fun of her pronunciation. A few days later, Alessia sat down for her first lesson, her heart fluttering with a fragile new hope. With a proper tutor, perhaps she could finally fit in, maybe even make friends. But her optimism shattered when she saw who stood behind her chair. Eric loomed over her, his presence intense and overwhelming as he leaned in close. Noticing her frozen state, his voice was a low rumble as he asked if something was wrong. Her mind raced, cheeks burning hot as she stammered, realizing with dawning horror that he was her new teacher. This was what he meant by "leave it to me." Ignoring her panic, he simply instructed her to begin by reading aloud. Leaning over her shoulder, his presence completely overwhelming, Eric softly murmured his agreement. He reassured her that getting her intent across was far more important than perfect pronunciation, telling her she didn't need to be so nervous. But Alessia's heart hammered against her ribs. His face was just too close. She could feel his warm breath ghosting across her skin, sending a shiver through her. A silent battle raged within her as she forced herself to calm down, recognizing this as a crucial opportunity. She remembered her resolve, forged in the fires of humiliation, to escape her miserable life. She had to get him on her side, no matter what it took. Her meticulously crafted plan was already in shambles. She was supposed to be the one in control, the one seducing him, yet his nearness had completely disarmed her. As she frantically repeated the words "be subtle" in her mind, his low voice slashed through the noise, asking if she was even listening. Before she could form a response, his hand gently covered hers where it rested on the table. The sudden, unexpected warmth was a shock to her system. In that single moment, Alessia's mind went completely blank, every ounce of her resolve melting away as her heart hammered against her ribs. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. A wave of heat crashed through Alessia's fallen form, fierce and undeniable. Her mind, once a fortress of resolve, was now a swirling vortex of confusion and an unfamiliar, potent longing. She could feel the hard muscles of his back coiling beneath her fingertips, a stark sign of his tightly leashed control. His rough, uneven breaths washed over her ear, and his heart hammered against her, a frantic rhythm that seemed to echo her own. For a fleeting, dizzying moment, a triumphant thought surfaced. The maid's sordid plan had actually worked. However, the illusion shattered in an instant. The raw tension suddenly bled from his frame, leaving an unnerving stillness. His face, once flushed with emotion, was now a blank canvas, his gaze distant and unreadable. A wave of confusion crashed over her. Had she imagined it all? Perhaps for a man like him, a celebrated war hero, such intense encounters were commonplace. The thought soured in her mind. Maybe he was just a practiced philanderer, accustomed to these kinds of affairs. Her mind unwillingly drifted back to that night, a hazy, feverish memory that still made her skin prickle. That had to be the reason. she thought with a new, bitter certainty. His vast experience would explain why he remained so calm, so infuriatingly skilled through it all. A hot flush crept up her neck at the mortifying recollection. She was so lost in her thoughts that she didn't notice him watching her until his deep voice slashed through the silence, asking what was wrong. Startled, Alessia quickly dismissed his concern, urging him to continue their lesson. But Eric simply leaned closer, his hand gently covering hers on the table, a warm and possessive gesture that made her breath catch. As her tutor guided her through the lesson, Alessia's mind wandered. She found herself thinking that Eric, despite not being her formal instructor, understood her far better. He was surprisingly patient, always praising her when she did well and correcting her mistakes with a gentleness she never expected. A chill ran down her spine as she remembered her first impression of him: cold, intimidating, and utterly unapproachable. A soft blush colored her cheeks as she clutched her book, realizing how wrong she'd been. She couldn't judge him by his stern exterior alone. Her tutor's voice gently pulled her from her reverie, suggesting a break to try the tea she'd prepared. She simply nodded, feeling a little flustered as they sat down to drink. The tutor's voice was a gentle murmur, encouraging her not to push herself so hard that she was gradually closing the distance. His praise was slashed short by a sudden, violent cough that ripped through the quiet room. He stumbled, collapsing against the sofa as he struggled for breath, and Alessia rushed to his side in a panic. "Are you all right?" she cried out. Seeing him in such distress, a terrible suspicion took hold. "What did you put in the tea?" she demanded, her voice trembling. But as the accusation left her lips, a horrifying memory surfaced, her maid secretly dropping a shimmering powder. The realization struck her like lightning. It wasn't him. That tea was meant for her. With sudden, furious movement, Eric cornered the treacherous woman, his grip like iron on her arm. He leaned in close, his voice a low growl as he demanded to know what, exactly, she was trying to do. His piercing blue eyes burned with cold rage as he stated with chilling certainty that this was no accident. Panicked, she tried to insist it was all a misunderstanding, admitting she'd wanted to catch his attention, but swearing she never meant for it to go this far. Unmoved, Eric pressed her, his voice dropping as he questioned her true objective. Why did she do it? Was this all some convoluted plot? The woman's fear then twisted into a chilling sort of justification as she asked quietly if it wasn't natural for a wife to want to please her husband. The chilling realization of her maid's betrayal faded into the background, replaced by the overwhelming presence of her husband. Eric loomed over her, his expression unreadable in the dim light, his piercing eyes holding an intensity that stole the breath from her lungs. He leaned in close, his voice a low, dangerous whisper that sent a shiver down her spine. He questioned if this meant she was prepared for the consequences of her actions. As he spoke, his finger gently traced the outline of her lips, a gesture that was both tender and terrifyingly possessive. Alessia could only stare, wide-eyed, her mind reeling as she understood the terrifying predicament she was now in. And that brings this chapter to a close. If you made it all the way to the end, you're amazing, and I seriously appreciate your time. These videos take a lot of late nights, energy, and passion to put together, and knowing you're watching makes it all worth it. So if you had fun, enjoyed the story, or just love diving into the world of manhwa as much as I do, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notifications so you never miss the next adventure. More epic stories are just around the corner.